So since we have this really cool and pretty rare Camco kit, I thought it might be a cool time to do a little quick history. Not that I claim to be this amazing Camco historian, but I know a bit of the history and I know a couple cool, interesting stories about it. So Camco actually came from a guy named George Way, who actually designed and worked for the Leedy Drum Company. And then he founded his own George Way Drum Company, and then it kind of morphed into the Camco. And the Camco we have, which is an Oaklawn, that's when George Way was involved, and you know, they made these really cool lugs, which look familiar to you, especially from the DW design. More on that later. Eventually from Oaklawn, they went to Chinook, Kansas, custom buys them. They moved to LA, they had a short period in Los Angeles. One of their big endorsers was a guy named Nick Ciroli, especially there in the 60s and 70s, played for the Tijuana Brass. Interesting side story. I'm in college touring, and the Ohio State Jazz Ensemble goes to LA. We sit in on the Merv Griffin show, and Nick Ciroli played the most killing samba you've ever heard, as like, you know, during the commercial breaks, but what a great player he was. So Camco goes out of business, and sure enough, this lug design and tooling and parts gets bought by Don Lombardi at the DW, and they go on making these incredibly fine drums in that era. The name, however, gets bought by Tama, who kept that name, and they made some really great high-end drums with some cool finishes there. Late 70s, very early 80s, and I saw Elvin Jones playing a set of Camcos at the Village Vanguard, roughly 1979, 1980. And he was their #1 endorser. The other interesting side story on this, they made these incredibly, you know, guys swear by how great these drums are, but the other thing that makes them desirable is they're very rare, especially in this kind of condition, great condition. So during this same period, a guy named Al Duffy is working at Ippolito's drum shop in New York. And he's taking the old Gretsch like this, or drum pedal, the leather straps. Elvin Jones, Billy Cobham, this is early 70s, are breaking these leather straps. So he goes down to a local hardware store and gets a chain, much like this, and sprocket. Starts custom putting these on the pedal. And his assistant, who took over when Al left, is a guy named Tim Herman, and we're still in touch. I used to go into Ippolito's when I was in New York. And they would take these Camco pedals, Gretsch pedals, and they would just retrofit them, sell them all over the place. Well, Al Duffy, when he invented this chain process, didn't have the money to patent it. So the guy who owned the shop, John Ippolito, said, I'll tell you what, I'll pay for it, and we'll both own the patent. Well, Ippolito's is going through changes, passes away, the store goes to his wife Jane. Don Lombardi now has the Camco name. He wants to get this chain drive drum pedal. So I guess he kept talking to Ippolito's widow, and nothing was ever happening, and somebody said, hey, Al Duffy owns that patent. Well, now Al Duffy has moved on, first to Hinger Touchtone, did all this design for them, eventually to Pearl. And Al was, and I saw this at the Pearl factory, he was making all those really fine maple drums out of Keller shells at the Pearl factory in the early 80s. And Al said, sure, I'll sell you the patent. So the first chain drive pedal, half that patent, went to Don Lombardi DW, who owned this patent. The other half that patent, Ippolito's widow sold it eventually to Camco. So there's the Camco, because they own the name, and they own also half this patent that Ippolito's owned. Interesting story how that happened. And you can see these two pedals, the Gretsch pedal and the Camco pedal, everything from these rocker assemblies, they're identical, just the same footboard. They just put the Camco name on them. So really cool drums, rare, with a really interesting history, highly sought after. And it's interesting, this kit is an Oaklawn kit, probably the most sought after. I'm sorry. Yes, this kit is an Oaklawn, and here's my Oaklawn snare drum, my personal one. And I will tell you, this drum sounds amazing. This, however, has what they call the cigar lugs on it, as opposed to the classic DW style George Way lugs on it. Cool piece of American drum history.